Derek Overstreet, founder of the New Millennium Group. We're a financial planning firm. We have advisors standing by right now to take your call. 888-999-6370. The reason you're going to want to call is we're going to help you retire 3 to 5 years before you thought possible. The way we do this is by putting together a step-by-step plan. So if you're one of those people listening and you'd like a plan in writing, give us a call at 888-999-6370. That's 888-999-6370, or go to utahsfinancialplanner.com.
Some of the most meaningful jewelry you own isn't new. It's inherited. A ring from a grandmother, a necklace full of memories, but no longer your style. Duke's Jewelers reimagines family heirlooms into custom pieces you'll actually wear and love. Working one-on-one, Duke's designers honor the original story while creating something fresh and modern. Don't let meaningful jewelry sit unused. Let it live on beautifully. Visit Duke's Jewelers in Springville or online at dukesjewelers.com, where old stories become new treasures.
All right, kicking off the final hour of the show, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Let's bring in good friend of the program. He is Mitch Harper, Cougar Insider, KSLSports.com. Mitch, how the heck are you, man?
Doing good, Scotty. I don't know if I'm as good as probably Aggie Nation right now, because Ben Jacobson, that's a really good hire.
See, you know, it's interesting, and I know you like this because this is just the life we live as members of the sports media. The discrepancy between those that are the national media or college basketball insiders or those that have been around the game, their opinion of this hire, and then your Aggie fans on Twitter are very, very different right now. And I don't know if it was because the Mark Madsen stuff blew up last night and everybody got really fired up about that, which, as Cam Walker just joined us, said was he's like, I don't know where this was coming from. He's like, I apparently hired a guy that I didn't even talk to. And so I don't know why it is, but Aggie fans not overly thrilled, but anybody who knows the game of basketball and has been covering the game of basketball thinks this is a big hire.
Yeah, it seems like a guy, too, that would stay a long time, too. Maybe, 5 years at least, and be someone that wants to build a program. I mean, he did it at the Missouri Valley. And I think, too, what kind of caught my attention was just, again, the Pac-12 is going to be, the best of the rest, and right there be one of the best leagues in college basketball next year. I think it's going to be a really good football league too. And I think that is a big step up from the Valley. And to get a guy that was there for 20 years, that's big time. He's got to a Sweet 16. I just think it was a really good hire. And that's why I had to bring it up, because I think that's a huge get for Utah State, and someone that can really cement himself potentially as a long-term guy instead of just being the up-and-coming 2-year guy and then exit, be someone that can build a program like Stu Morrill did back in the day.
Obviously, spring football's got your attention right now. If you are Kevin Young, what's your and this is with the knowledge that or the anticipation that A.J. DeBonsa will leave, which I think we all know and anticipate will happen. What's your first order of business, knowing that you got Branch coming, but trying to build out this team going forward?
You got to have shooters, and I think that a lot of focus is going to be, I think, from fans on the defensive side, and they do need to get better. Even though it was probably hard to see it in stretches this season, but I do believe that they did get better this season defensively in moments and stretches of this season. BYU did have some times where the product did look better on the defensive end, but I think ultimately the offense took a big step back this season, and they should have been a lot better, at least what they looked to be on paper going into the year, but they didn't have consistent shooters, guys that could knock down threes. And I think when you had a guy like A.J. DeBonsa, you needed to have shooters around him, and they just didn't have that. And that even included when Richie Saunders was in the lineup. He was up and down shooting the three. He had some games where he was 0 for 7. And Bruce Branch is not like A.J. DeBonsa. He's more a catch and shoot type of guy, but he's also a good passer too. And he's really standing out in the McDonald's All-American practices this week down in Arizona. And I think that, shooting is going to be key. I think that ultimately you got to have offense, and you got to be a team that can put it in the hole consistently. And I just don't think that BYU had enough of that outside of AJ, who consistently could always get to his spots and get his, but he just didn't have the shooters around him. And I think that was the biggest issue. And that's what Kevin Young is going to have to look for quite a bit in this portal and building out this team for next year. They also bring in Dean Rickert from the high school ranks, but they've got to retool through the transfer portal, and shooting is going to be a top priority.
What's your anticipation of the decision of Rob Wright?
I expect that he would be back. And, Rob Wright has really enjoyed his time at BYU this season. And Kevin Young believes in Rob Wright that they can build around him. Now, I think Wright, though, has got to, if he does run it back and returns to BYU, he's got to be someone that can bring it all together and unify the team and maximize everyone's talents around him. I think one of the knocks on Rob Wright this past season, defensively, there were some lapses. I do think at the end of the season, the postseason, he got better, particularly in the Big 12 tournament, because it kind of hit rock bottom in that loss at West Virginia. But, you saw a big step back in play on the offensive end from Keba Keita from his junior season to his senior year. And I think the biggest change was going from Yegor Dielman to Rob Wright. And that changed things because Rob Wright was taking a lot of that space, that real estate in the paint, where maybe Keita was operating freely with Yegor, who was actively looking for him on alley-oops and getting him involved early and often in games as that rim rolling five that Kevin Young loves in his system. That changed. And I think Rob Wright's got to be better at looking beyond just simply the superstar guy with him. And that was AJ this past year. And Bruce Branch would expect it to be that type of guy, depending on how this roster comes together. But I think Rob Wright, is someone that you want to continue to build with, I believe. And I think that he's not a bad guy in terms of the locker room. I think he's just a little bit too quiet. He's really young, and he's still kind of like a kid, even though there's been big dollar amounts attached to his name and what that's been, the movement that he's had from Baylor to BYU. Can he really become a leader of the locker room? And I think that's going to be the challenge for Rob Wright, and where I have maybe the biggest questions, because when you look at that, early roster for next year, if Rob Wright was to run it back, he would be looked upon to be the guy, because you're not going to bank on Bruce Branch to be that guy. It needs to be someone who's been part of it, and would be Rob Wright. And can he take on that role? I kind of compared a little bit to LJ Martin in football, where he was so young and so quiet. And, now he's evolved into that leader for the football side. Can Rob Wright take a jump like that if he does return to BYU? And I expect that, he would be back at BYU if he does decide to stay in the college ranks.
With where Damon went in the draft and where we anticipate AJ will go in the draft, and considering Yegor's first year in the NBA, that if the money's even, which I know BYU can hang with anybody financially in college basketball, so that shouldn't be a problem. How appealing now is playing basketball at BYU for a kid coming out of high school?
I think it's very appealing because, Kevin Young is shown, he's given proof of concepts. That's what Kevin Young's all about, proof of concepts. And I think that, if you're a high school prospect who has aspirations to be a one and done and go to the NBA, you're going to be prepared for the National Basketball Association. I really believe that Yegor going 8th overall last year was in part because of the respect that the Brooklyn Nets had for Kevin Young. Next to the Utah Jazz, the Brooklyn Nets were the second most, frequent visitor to that annex the year that Yegor was playing at BYU. Brooklyn was always on the scene watching Yegor's games and being in Provo to see him in person. I think a part of it was because they believed that Yegor was being prepared and trained like a pro, where many mock drafts going into last summer's draft had Yegor around 14 and lower. The Nets took him at 8 because I think there was a lot of confidence that they knew that he was being trained like an NBA player already, that when he'd step into the league, he'd be able to contribute right away. And that happened despite, up and down 3-point shooting at the college ranks from Yegor. He was really consistent before his injury this rookie season with the Nets, to where he set, a rookie NBA record for most consecutive games with at least one 3-pointer which would have been crazy to say during his time at BYU because he was in the 20s in three-point shooting. So I think Kevin Young's got a lot of respect of NBA front offices, the way that he develops and trains players. And you saw that too with AJ, that he got better over the course of the season. So the whole NBA development is definitely there. Now, can Kevin Young also turn that NBA development, which is proving itself to be very beneficial? And he wants that to continue to be a part of his program because he made it clear that it was bittersweet to leave the NBA and potentially lose those connections to the NBA. Well, the bridge to that is getting these young, promising one and done guys. And that's allowed him to maintain those relationships. So that's going to be a key piece for BYU's program. But can they parlay that into more consistent on-court success at the college ranks? Because it is different games. And that's going to be finding that happy balance for Kevin Young going forward. And I do think there were some lessons learned this season for Kevin Young that he's going to apply in the years going forward. You know, finding maybe guys that aren't necessarily the greatest measurables or the greatest, NBA bodies potentially, but maybe they're just great college players and leaning into that a little bit more in building out the depth of the roster rather than just focusing solely on measurements and verticals and things like that and big bodies that look like NBA personnel. So finding that happy balance will be important going forward for Kevin Young and his program to try to get back to future Sweet 16s down the road.
How much considering that there are a lot of built-in excuses, the Richie Saunders injury, the other injuries that took place earlier in the year, is not making the Sweet 16, how bitter of a taste in the mouth of Kevin Young in this program is there right now?
Hey, I'm Josh Spiegel, host of the podcast Lunatic in the Newsroom. If you enjoy journalism that drifts into mild panic, wild overthinking, and a guaranteed nervous breakdown, Lunatic in the Newsroom is for you. It's news like you've never heard before. The only newsroom with a panic button. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and gasp in horror as the show spirals completely out of control. It's not just news, it's emotionally unstable. Lunatic in the Newsroom. Listen today.
Did you know dental pain is the top reason children miss school? Dental disease in children is almost entirely preventable. Good habits start early with brushing, regular dental visits, and fluoride protection. Your smile matters. Find resources at yoursmileutah.org.
Mom, can you tell me a story?
Sure. Once upon a time, a mom needed a new car.
Was she brave?
She was tired, mostly. But she went to Carvana.com and found a great car at a great price. No secret treasure map required.
Did you have to fight a dragon?
Nope. She bought it 100% online. From her bed, actually.
Was it scary?
Honey, it was as unscary as car buying could be.
Did the car have a sunroof?
It did, actually.
Okay, good story.
Car buying you'll want to tell stories about. Buy your car today on
Carvana.
Delivery fees may apply.
Hi, this is Alex Kantrowitz. I'm the host of Big Technology Podcast, a longtime reporter and an on-air contributor to CNBC. And if you're like me, you're trying to figure out how artificial intelligence is changing the business world and our lives. So each week on Big Technology, I bring on key actors from companies building AI tech and outsiders trying to influence it, asking where this is all going. They come from places like NVIDIA, Microsoft, Amazon, and plenty more. So if you want to be smart with your wallet, your career choices, in meetings with your colleagues, and at dinner parties, listen to Big Technology Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
It's really bitter, and it's a huge disappointment because even without Richie, they still should have won at least one game.
Yeah.
But they should have. This is a team that was built in the investment financially and the number exactly what it was. I mean, that unless we saw every single contract, we wouldn't know specifically. But I mean, there was a strong commitment financially to go make a real run at this thing, and you get bounced in the round of 64 like many BYU teams that didn't have a dime attached to its name. So it looked very similar to what BYU fans have really grown accustomed to their whole time watching BYU basketball, getting bounced, giving up career days to a guy in the NCAA tournament. That's the same song and dance BYU's always played. So huge disappointment. And to have one of the four best players in college basketball, because AJ's a finalist for the Naismith, and to just get bounced in the first round, that's disappointing. And the thing is that I always point to, we saw issues even in non-conference play before the arrest of Kennard Davis, before the injury to Dawson Baker, before the injury to Richie Saunders. We saw issues with this team as early as even the Delaware game in early November, where they're giving up, they're in a big double-digit deficit at home to Delaware. And, Delaware was not a great team this year, and they were faced with a hole. And so there were issues even early on before all of the things started to stack up against them. The good thing for BYU, though, over the past, season was that AJ elevated his game and he evolved, but there were issues all along the way, and it never felt like it all just clicked completely for BYU. Maybe the Clemson game was maybe its peak when Rob Wright hit that thrilling bucket, but even in that game, they're down 20 plus at half, and they needed an amazing comeback to pull it off. So again, it never fully clicked night after night for a full 40 minutes, like that first year with Kevin Young, where they reeled off 8 straight to close out the season and got to the Sweet 16. This team just never had that at any point this year. And for that, I think it makes it a really disappointing year.
All right, let's switch gears. Let's talk football as spring ball continuing on. What have been the storylines that have really jumped out at you so far?
I think one of the big things that's kind of caught my attention is that how Kalani Sitake has noted that Kelly Poppinga is exceeding his expectations as a defensive coordinator. Kalani has made it known, with anyone that will ask or he'll talk to is that K-Pop was the guy that, he wanted to appoint as the defensive coordinator, to the point where he was even in the back of his mind thinking if Jay Hill leaves, and I'm sure Kalani knew better than anyone that there was real opportunities every offseason for Jay Hill to bounce. So Kalani was probably building out his own big board of potential DC targets, and the guy that Kalani says was atop that target list was Kelly Poppinga. And with only 1 week left in spring ball, Kalani has said that K-Pop is exceeding expectations that he had coming into spring with the way that he's managing the defense and overseeing this thing. And that's got to be nice for Kalani, because Kalani, of course, having his background with defense and still having, Gary Anderson and then Chad Kahaha still on the staff. He's now elevated to the outside linebackers role. They still maintain Justin Enna, who just takes on special teams. He managed the loss of Jay Hill, which was significant and a big departure. And I'm curious to see what this looks like with Kelly Poppinga this season. But Kalani has never been one to just go out of his way to say he feels really good about a certain or to embrace conversation about expectations. For him to say that K-Pop is exceeding his expectations and that he's really confident this is going to be a good thing defensively, I thought it was noteworthy from Kalani, because, again, he just doesn't play that game. He goes into a lot of coach speak more times than not, and he's been really impressed with Kelly Poppinga's done it. And you can't deny what there's been glimpses of being seen on the defensive side. Like, you're seeing some of the edge rushers, they're outside linebackers, like a Hunter Clegg's leaned out a little bit. Former Utah signee returned home from his mission, and he's part of BYU's defense. He's going to be a really big piece going forward for BYU. Braxton Lindsey, a former 4-star recruit who picked BYU over Oklahoma. He's going to be a name to watch. There's a lot of talent, and K-Pop has had so much success in his coaching career with guys like Kyle Vinoy, Fred Warner, and you're seeing signs of that. So it's a little bit of a merging of the Bronco era and the Kalani era, and a little bit of Kyle Whittingham influence into this program. It's an interesting mix of how this is going to come together, this defense, and Kalani feels really good about it. I think that's probably one of the big storylines in the final week of spring.
Is JoJo Phillips your number one receiver coming out of fall camp, or do you think somebody elevates that position?
I'll say he's number one right now, but I wouldn't be married to it. If I was Fesi Sitake and Aaron Roderick, I think it's still a case of you got to go prove it in games. Ultimately, I do think that so far he's looked pretty good in spring ball, and BYU's got a good secondary returning. Evan Johnson's been in and out. They're kind of holding him out precautionary to ultimately get him ready for the fall and be ready to go there. So you're not getting one-on-ones, one first team defense, first team offense all the time. So it's still kind of wait and see. And I think the Pop-Tarts Bowl performance from JoJo was really good. And And he was someone that had a great relationship, developed a lot of chemistry early on when Bear Bachmeier arrived on campus last summer. And that showed itself early on last season, where Bear was always looking to JoJo before he suffered that shoulder injury against Stanford. And so maybe they can pick up that chemistry and build that into this season. But, I think that the tight end position is really what's going to help BYU the most with its passing attack this year, because they've got two players in Walker Lyons and Roger Saliapaga. It's probably the best 1-2 tight end receiving unit that BYU's had, probably at least since the Matt Bushman year, and when they were going into 2020 and they had Bushman and Isaac Rex, and then Bushman goes down with an injury. It's probably that best tandem since then, and maybe even have to go back further to actually see production. So this is a pretty good tight end unit, and they feel like they go 4 deep at that spot with Noah Moeaki as well, and Kean Need is more of a blocker. So that's going to be, I think, the position that could get targeted quite a bit and be up there in the receiving yards. We saw that with Carson Ryan, but I think it goes to an even higher level with Lyons and Saliapaga in the receiving game for this tight end unit.
So what are your thoughts? Buha's put on some weight. He's at, I think, 280 now, and the plan is to move him to D tackle, correct?
That's right. Yeah, Viliami Buha is going to be in the interior, and so he's going to be making the switch full time. He dabbled with it a little bit last year from D end, occasionally in that odd front, playing some D tackle, but now he's going to be a full time defensive tackle, and it's the right move because again, he's added a lot of weight. And look, I mean, his dad's one of the great D tackles in Utah history, and was a vet in the NFL, and he's coaching on BYU's defensive line this year. So dad probably knows best in that situation, and Viliami goes to the interior, and he'll team up with guys like, Keanu Tanavasa, who returns, and Keanu's kind of in that bucket of players that's, probably, being held out for the most part to get ready for what's going to be waiting ahead in the fall. But, you've also got Justin Kirkland, too, Oklahoma State transfer last year, didn't really make much of an impact at all last season. He dealt with the knee injury in fall camp, and that put him really behind the 8 ball pretty much the entire season. I remember he made that return in the Colorado game in late September, but just never really got going. It seemed like he was lost a little bit. Now he's healthy. He's ready to go. I expect more production from him. And it might be a case of you never see him pop up in a stat sheet, but he's going to be assignment sound and be tough in helping with BYU, stopping the run and being stout on that regard. So I think he'll be in that mix too. And then Anisi Purcell, another senior. Those are probably your top 4 guys for BYU in the interior of the defensive line.
What transfer player do you anticipate having, or you don't have to go with one, but maybe 2 or 3 transfer guys that you anticipate having a big impact on this team?
Lyons and Saliapaga, as I noted, but I would also add too Kyler Casper from Oregon.
That's who I was going to bring up. No big numbers, but man, he's a big mamma jamba out there.
No production really at all since he, was the 4 years at Oregon, 2 season-ending foot injuries, had a connection with Trayson Bourget, BYU's, backup quarterback right now, the number 2 guy at this point, heading into the final week of spring ball. They had a connection through their time in 7-on-7 football in Arizona. And when Casper hit the portal, Bourget kind of brought Casper up to BYU coaches, and BYU recruited him lightly out of high school, and he was a 4-star recruit before he committed to Oregon. But he's someone that I think, if you talk about going back to the conversation of number 1 wide receiver, Casper could end up being that potentially. I think that's a big jump again from no production 4 years in college to now being a number 1 for a team that's looking to break through and get to the playoff. But I think that he is someone that has been garnering rave reviews in spring ball so far, and there's high expectations for him. I mean, I would look at Casper, JoJo Phillips, Tana Kua. Those are probably some of the top 3 guys, Reggie Frischneck, Cody Hagan, and then true freshman legend Glasker being in there too. And you've also got Tiger Bachmeier returning. So BYU's got options. It's just all those names I mentioned. That sounds deep when you mention the names, but really no one's produced at a high level consistently to where you feel really good about the value you get for that guy at wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. So it's still to be determined, but there's some optimism at that wide receiver spot. And Kyler Casper, I think his arrival and his impact he's showing in spring ball is reason to believe that they could still be a pretty productive unit, because if he wasn't showing signs in spring, I think you'd have a little bit more, not bleak outlook, but you wouldn't be as optimistic that they could be highly productive if he wasn't having the success he's having so far in spring ball.
You know, it's funny, and this always makes me feel old when I see things like this. Another reason I brought him up is because I remember his dad playing for the Broncos, and it wasn't that long ago that Kevin Casper was a heck of a wide receiver in the Broncos. I think he played 8 years in the league with the Broncos and others, but I mean, there's some good genetics there for sure.
He is, yeah, and his dad played at Iowa, and then as you noted, the Broncos, and Casper too has got a younger brother who's a 3-star guy down in Arizona that BYU's offered. So they're really bought into that family, and Aaron Roderick's talked about the connection with knowing the dad, knowing the Casper family, and kind of forming a good relationship with them to taking a chance, and that's it's. He is a different type of transfer that BYU has just not been pursuing in recent portal cycles. The common thread with many of the portal guys that BYU adds that you point to is that they had a really strong existing relationship before committing or going to another program out of high school. BYU typically always goes for those guys like a Pocky Finau, who's probably going to be BYU's starting left tackle this year. He transfers in from Washington. BYU was recruiting him heavily out of high school. They couldn't get him the first go round. The moment he hits the portal, they kind of hit the ground running and pick up where they left off, and they make that portal acquisition happen quickly. Whereas, again, Kyler Casper, they recruited him a little bit, but it wasn't too extensive, where it was still kind of a little bit of a wild card, and they had the connection with the younger brother. And then when Kyler hit the portal and Bourget, his connection all kind of came together, but still it didn't fit the typical way of going about a BYU portal acquisition, where it's like, yes, they knew the position coach. They kind of make this thing seamless and just take it, they just go forward with it. But I think it's needed for BYU, because again, I think if they're going to break through and go win the Big 12, try to get to the playoff, they've got to take some big swings on guys that maybe they've never worked with before, hands-on, and just try to go get, some players. I think it would have been huge for BYU had there been a spring portal to maybe fill a few of the gaps potentially coming out of spring, but still, this is a pretty good football team, and one that should have a pretty high floor going into fall of 2026.
Good stuff as always. Appreciate your time, Mitch, and we'll talk again here very soon, I'm sure.
You bet, Scotty. Take care, man.
There he is, Mitch Harper, Cougar Insider at KSLSports.com.
Hi, this is Alex Kantrowitz. I'm the host of Big Technology Podcast, a longtime reporter and an on-air contributor to CNBC. And if you're like me, you're trying to figure out how artificial intelligence is changing the business world and our lives. So each week on Big Technology, I bring on key actors from companies building AI tech and outsiders trying to influence it, asking where this is all going. They come from places like NVIDIA, Microsoft, Amazon, and plenty more. So if you want to be smart with your wallet, your career choices, in meetings with your colleagues, and at dinner parties, listen to Big Technology Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
I sold my car in Carvana last night.
Well, that's cool.
No, you don't understand. It went perfectly. Real offer, down to the penny. They're picking it up tomorrow. Nothing went wrong.
So, what's the problem?
That is the problem. Nothing in my life goes as smoothly. I'm waiting for the catch.
Maybe there's no catch.
That's exactly what a catch would want me to think.
Wow, you need to relax.
I need to knock on wood. Do we have wood? Is this table wood?
I think it's laminate.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's close enough.
Car selling without a catch. Sell your car today on
Carvana.
Pickup fees may apply.